Let's talk about teaching movement. As far as teaching movement to an individual, whether they're symptomatic or asymptomatic. So when we teach movement, it helps to go back to understanding the first year of a human being's life. So that first year of life, in general, we learn how to walk, and it takes us that long. We're probably the only mammals to take about a year or so to learn how to walk, or to ambulate, or for locomotion. So also in that first year of life, there's clues to our development. And let's go to the infant's teeth eruption patterning, meaning when the teeth start to show up in an infant. So in general, the first teeth that start to show are the incisors. And the incisors usually coincide in development where there's more of a demand for this front back plane of motion, sagittal plane control or stability. And then would come our molars. Our first back molars would start to develop or erupt, and that's more of the side to side frontal plane control that's required. And then finally, what usually comes later on are the canines, which work in this turning plane of motion, or transverse plane, or their rotation plane of motion. Okay, so when you teach movement in general to adults, it helps to assess where they are with those three planes of motion. Okay, so in general, you always want to start, how are they in the sagittal plane? How do they manage in this front back plane of motion? Then you move on to the frontal plane, and then when those sagittal and frontal they have a certain degree of competency, then you start to work on the transverse or the rotation plane of motions. Now in the fitness industry, being a movement specialist it's a big term right now. So there's a lot of philosophies, and one of the recurring ones is rotation. That's functional rotation. These are patterns we need to rotate, which is true. But oftentimes, just like how some people didn't learn how to crawl before they walked, which is not wrong, it's fairly common. Oftentimes we teach people how to rotate or turn or twist in the name of some kind of rotation functional pattern of sorts. It's basically choreography. Now, all human movement is beautiful, and there's nothing wrong or right about it. It's just a way, an expression of how the body can move. So if you start teaching clients just for the sake of the complexity and how cool it looks, so you can post it on social media, look at all these dancing basically in the disguise of, oh, this is functional, this is the way humans were meant to move. Well, what I often see is some people, they've kind of skipped the crawling phase, as an example, and went right to sprinting. So you're going to see some funny or interesting compensations. And just an example, if you teach people and force them, and then you start loading and progressing them into these very complex choreography of rotation functional patterns, they're going to create a lot of compensations. The same way elite athletes or professional athletes are the ultimate compensators, because they have to keep on moving, they have to keep on performing. So they don't have time to learn how to move or whatnot. They just move for performance, so they have a lot of compensations to keep them going. Same thing when you teach people all these complex choreographies, functional movements, whatever that term means. I'll give you a quick example. I've noticed time and time again, and you've probably seen this yourselves too, is when they're not qualified in, let's say, those other planes of motion, sagittal or frontal plane, and they're being bombarded, masturbated into the transverse plane, their neck starts to act up, or eventually somewhere down the line, they may not be symptomatic right away, but over time, they start developing neck issues. Why? Because the neck is kind of like this do-it-all type of area of the body that it's literally saying, hey, we don't have the capacity to turn as much, but I'll do it for you, but I also have to stop you because you're overdoing things as far as this rotation, when you're not able to own, or you're not able to manage yourself more in the other plane, the sagittal and frontal plane. So you'll usually see these people start to do things with their neck, shrug, and one shoulder's higher than the other, and they're turning and twisting. It's it's fairly common. It's not right or wrong, it's just an observation. So in summary or in general, when you're teaching movement, or if you're a movement professional, whether it be symptomatic or asymptomatic, it may help to regress and go back to how we develop naturally as human beings in the first year of life when we learn how to walk. Use the teeth development as an example. Start with sagittal plane, progress towards frontal plane, and move on to the transverse, the ever almighty transverse or rotation plane of motion. Okay, but understand none of these planes really exist. They're just references, they're just terms, but I don't want to confuse you on that. Anyway, that's all I have to say.